And I think this is going to be an argument that's going to be important going forward with the so-called Department of Government Efficiency to be headed by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. A lot of those guys obviously have a lot of interest in particular AI algorithms and AI companies, some of which they run. Elon Musk in particular was recently funded very heavily by Larry Fink's BlackRock, the low-risk totalitarian government guy. And, if the talking point is, what if the Doge talking point becomes, by increasing efficiency, we're replacing a lot of the human workforce in government with AI.
In a recent Before School podcast interview with Whitney Webb, we explore AI, surveillance, digital currencies, and Bitcoin's future. Bitcoin is trading at $999,000, up 3% in the last 24 hours, but down 7% over 30 days. Like, subscribe, and share. Now, let's hear more from Whitney Webb.
Would that actually functionally shrink government in terms of the size and influence and power that government programs have over people's lives? Or is it just, basically maintaining the same size, but you're reducing the human workforce and subbing them out for an AI? And I think people should definitely carefully consider a lot of the proposals coming forth of there, because a lot of these big Silicon Valley guys, Elon Musk included, his grandfather was actually the but the head of the Canadian branch of Technocracy Inc., which wanted to see the United States merge with Canada and Greenland and become basically a North American technate, and basically have this system of experts and engineers and AI essentially, but this is sort of before AI was invented, but technocrats now argue for AI, that should run society instead of really a democratically elected government, ultimately, that it's better to have society sort of micromanaged by the experts, so to speak. And the undisputed expert on technocracy is Patrick Wood, for anyone that's interested in learning more about that and Technocracy Inc. and how it developed over time. And it's been a very big interest to sort of these elite clans in the U.S. with a lot of influence, like the Rockefeller family and philanthropies, for example. And a lot of it is about, sort of making everything, these days anyway, is about, this digital transformation stuff, and making everything micromanageable by having everything be completely surveillable, and having a lot of it be focused on individual energy usage. And the argument, of course, has been made with overlaps between that and plans for some sort of, carbon market or carbon wallet. That's sort of a way to manage people's energy usage, which is what Technocracy had previously proposed. So anyway, sort of getting off on a tangent there. But a lot of these, Silicon Valley guys are very good at wrapping themselves in rhetoric that seems populist and saying things that are politically popular with certain demographics. But ultimately, they have, visions for the future that they have laid out, and definitely have conflicts of interest. Many of them are, military and intelligence contractors who also share kind of dystopian technocratic visions for the future, and I think people should consider that before being so trusting of them. So downstream of that, Larry Fink has also said that markets prefer totalitarian governments over democracies, which can be messy. Why? Because if it's a messy democracy, risk is higher, and if it's an authoritarian, tyrannical society, risk is lower. And so if you're an elite and you have all of this wealth that you want to keep and you never want to share, and you want to entrench your wealth and power, you have to think about, how do I maintain this with the lowest risk possible? And that inherently seems to be controlling everybody else, and ensuring that you live in this society where your wealth is protected, and there's not a lot of unseen risks, protests, or whatever things that could get in the way of your bottom line, ultimately, at the end of the day. So I think, again, these are things that people should consider when looking at these types of sales pitches, because a lot of the argument for putting AI in charge of, major decision making, whether law enforcement or elsewhere, is that it's innovative, it's cost efficient, it's cheaper, but isn't necessarily better.
As Whitney Webb discussed AI surveillance, let's now hear her thoughts on how digital currencies like Bitcoin are impacted by these evolving systems and why decentralization may be key to safeguarding our privacy.
Well, so predictive policing, as it would be implemented now, would obviously involve an artificial intelligence algorithm. So basically, you would have to ensure that those algorithms are as close to 100% accurate as possible, and none of them are. So invariably, this AI or a pre-crime AI may say that you are likely to commit a crime and you're not, but how do you argue with it, right? Computer says. And a lot of the big, artificial intelligence thinkers in the security space, like ex-Google CEO Eric Schmidt, who ran the government's U.S. National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, he essentially argues that artificial intelligence is going to be, if not already, vastly superior to humans, and because of that, it thinks differently than humans and thus cannot explain itself to humans. It can't explain how it reaches a particular conclusion. And so, but because we should, almost religiously believe that AI is much more intelligent than humans, that we should accept its conclusions without question. Interesting. Definitely a good way for government to avoid accountability for all sorts of stuff with that type of logic. But as an aside, that would mean that if that's applied, that type of thinking is applied with an inaccurate AI in the law enforcement context, there's really no way to argue against it, because they'll be like, well, the algorithm says that you will. And you'll be like, but I won't. And I mean, how far do you think that would necessarily get you in the justice system if this is actually implemented on any meaningful level? It's complicated, and there's all sorts of things that could factor into that. Again, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of these algorithms are known to be racially biased against certain socioeconomic classes. A lot of the ones previously used for law enforcement, if you live in a particular neighborhood with a higher crime incident, you're deemed, just by living there, more likely to commit a crime, right? Even if you have no plans to do so. And so there's all sorts of factors that are considered by artificial intelligence, but ultimately take, human agency out of the equation. And I think that's, quite obvious that that's troubling. And again, aside from biases, there's also the fact that AIs are known to hallucinate and just make stuff up that isn't real. And, there's been a lot of instances of that, particularly in the era of generative AI, where it's just, made answers that make no sense, or like outright made stuff up in response to questions it's asked. That type of thing can happen with AI. And so, if you're going to outsource decision-making that can ruin an entire person's life to an algorithm that isn't 100% accurate, should we do that as a society? And again, it's very hard to know how accurate these programs actually are. So for example, if the company says it's 90% accurate, that's the company saying it. Is it independently vetted? Really, none of these statistics about accuracy are independently vetted. So for all you know, it could be 70%, 60% accurate. And a lot of time, as we know, people, when it's a contract, obviously it seems most likely in the U.S. context, such an AI would be given, it'd be contracted from a private company. There's a lot of cronyism there. So somebody knows somebody and they get the contract, even though they're not really the ones that were the best business for the contract, right? So maybe they have an even less accurate algorithm. So even if you have one that's, let's say, actually is 70% accurate, what do you do with the 30% of people they flag? And how do you determine their innocence if you're operating in a pre-crime scenario? It's definitely not good for civil liberties. And I think ultimately it's not necessarily going to reduce crime. Larry Ellison, who I mentioned earlier, was recently interviewed about how extreme AI surveillance like this will ensure that citizens are on their best behavior And this is kind of the idea from which the name panopticon is derived, right? Which was originally a prison design. If you're constantly being watched and surveilled, even if you're doing nothing wrong, just knowing you're constantly watched will make you auto-correct your behavior, be on your best behavior always. But to me, that's inherently tyrannical and authoritarian, and very bad. And definitely against what a lot of American values and constitutional values. And so I don't really agree with that vision for the future. But a lot of these people in elite circles think very differently than that. So take, for example, someone like Larry Fink of BlackRock, who, as we know, has a lot of outsized influence on the world. His entire career has been devoted to minimizing risk in markets, right? Because he famously got fired from First Boston for making a bad trade, and then creates BlackRock, and then BlackRock's AI Aladdin, which is designed to analyze the risk of any investment decision and basically ensure that BlackRock makes the lowest risk investment or decision possible, things like that. So there is a lot of Malthusian, what I would call Malthusianism, in the thoughts of people that developed, the so-called sustainable development agenda. And you can also see that in sort of manifest in some of the things that, some of these Silicon Valley technocrats have said. But a lot of the Silicon Valley guys are very into, transhumanism and the idea of an inevitable post-human future. And I definitely don't think it's inevitable. I think it's inevitable if people resign themselves to the fact it's inevitable. And so having, people being inundated with that claim by mass media that's also controlled by the Silicon Valley oligarchs that have that particular point of view can predispose us to sort of sleepwalk into that future. But I don't think it's a necessity or that it's an inevitability at all, and that it's not necessary for humans to merge their brains with AI, for example, as Elon Musk argues, in order to survive as a species. I think that is just sort of fear-based marketing for, a product that he personally produces, Neuralink, but also other companies like BlackRock Neurotech, among others, Synchron, I think, is another one, are developing and are poised to commercialize in the near future, and I'm sure that will be sold to the public as an even more convenient version of the smartphone. It's in your brain. You don't even need to touch screens or buttons or look at anything, But I don't know how many people will actually adopt that, because presumably the stepping stone before that would be like the VR goggles, the Apple Vision Pros, the smart glasses, and all of that. And I haven't really seen people being interested in widely adopting that. So I think it would have to be something more economically forced on people at some point. Like the only way to work in the gig economy is to use these things or to have these things, for example. I think that's really the only way to ensure that there's any sort of market demand for them at some point, is to sort of make it kind of an imposed market demand on the public. Because obviously if people wanted that stuff, they'd be using it. It exists. And a lot of those products have been big flops. So as far as Malthusianism go, there's sort of this idea that humanity has to disappear by merging itself with machines. And there's also this view that the world can't support, X billion number of people. The number has to be much smaller. And I think there's been really a long-term effort to sort of engineer that idea, and it's been going on for a very long time. Like you have people like forget his first name, his last name's Ehrlich. He wrote The Population Bomb, but back in the 70s he said, very soon, everything will collapse because of the population, and then the world population greatly surpasses that, and it didn't happen. And there's sort of been this argument that's very common with people who sort of were in the past and since then have developed some, development plans and things like that for the United Nations that make arguments that the world's population needs to be a lot smaller than it is right now for sustainable development, quote unquote, to actually be able to happen. I think sustainable development, as it's sold to the public through groups like the UN, for example, are really not what they claim to be. It's not really sustainable development for the good of the planet and the people. A lot of it is really aimed at ensuring that people are onboarded to some type of digital control system for easier management of the masses, and particularly onboarding people onto types of surveillable, programmable digital money, whether that means a central bank digital currency or a private sector digital currency like a stable coin, for example. But all of that can be just as surveillable and programmable as CBDCs. And, once you take control of the money and can surveil all the money and program the money to only be able to be used to purchase products X, Y, and Z and not products ABC, for example, you can begin really micromanaging people and basically what type of economic activity people at any scale you want.
To watch the full interview, check the link in the description. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Can Bitcoin protect against surveillance-driven economies? How will AI shape financial systems? If you enjoyed this discussion, please like, subscribe, and share for more content on decentralized technologies. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe